But basically, my knowledge of Jesus was salvation, and that's what he is. But there's so much more to the Bible, the gospel. I'm not saying you add anything to it. It's very simple. The gospel is being saved, but there's so much victory that was obtained on the cross through Jesus dying on the cross for us, that we don't really walk in on earth. We think it's just for heaven, but God had a plan and a purpose from the very beginning, for his children to walk in victory on the earth. If you know anything about the Bible, in the Old Testament, the Israelites were in bondage, in slavery in Egypt. And he had the perfect plan at the time to deliver them, by Moses leading them out of the land of slavery and into the land flowing with milk and honey, their promised land, the land of Canaan. And it was a foreshadowing of what Jesus came to do for us, where, whenever the Israelites were in Egypt, in the wilderness, once they had left Egypt, the Lord set up a system to have them walk in holiness, which was sacrificing animals, and the blood would cleanse them of their sins. But today, it just wasn't the perfect plan, because it was burdensome. They had to keep the law, they had to try to be perfect. And if they weren't, they sacrificed animals. And it was just a burdensome law. So then God had a plan to send his son, Jesus, and he died for us. And he was the perfect sacrificial lamb. And his blood covers us. It heals us. It saves us. It delivers us. And I'm going to get into all that with my testimony. But, there's just so much more that I learned as an adult than what I knew as a child. And that's how it should be. So anyway, starting with my testimony, when I was 26, I was very healthy. I grew up running, playing lots of sports. And when I was 25, I decided I would run a marathon. And I began training. I trained all through the winter. This was 2009 into 2010. It snowed a lot that year. And I was faithful. I was out running not every day. I ran 4 days a week because I followed a training plan. But anyway, early 2010, I ran my first marathon. And to this date, my only marathon. It was so exhilarating. I felt so healthy. Like, it was amazing. And then in April, so that was January of 2010, April, I ended up running my first 10K, which I started with a marathon. Don't ask me why. I just had high ambition. And ran a 10K, did okay, but I was kind of injured from the marathon. I had pulled my hip flexor, so I was still kind of in pain 3 months later. And then with little training in August, I decided to run my first half marathon, and I did very well. I didn't train that much, but I still felt in great shape from what I had done earlier in the year. And then right after that half marathon, going into the fall, I was a cross-country coach, and I was coaching other runners. I was very busy. I had started a new job where I traveled to doctors' offices to scan records. And I was also coaching every afternoon, all day Saturday. We would be at meets, some Tuesday evenings, some Thursday evenings. And I started getting really fatigued. Although at the time, I really didn't know what fatigue really felt like. But I would come home every day after practice, and I would probably take a 2 to 3 hour nap. And then I would wake up, eat dinner, and go to bed, and do it all again the next day. And I just thought I was super busy. I had a lot going on. I just wasn't getting enough rest. But actually, in reality, I was probably still sleeping 9 hours a night, even after taking like a 2-hour nap in the evenings. So, long story short, I think it was about towards the end of October, I was on the phone with my best friend and I dropped something on the floor and I reached down to pick it up, and I don't know, I just had like this weird feeling like something was like stuck in my chest. And so I was like feeling around. I'm like, what was that? And that's when I felt a lump in my breast. And I thought, how strange. I'm 26. I'm very healthy. I've always been like really into healthy eating and limiting sweets and getting lots of exercise. So, I kind of brushed it off at first, but then over the next few weeks, I kept feeling it. And I'm like, it's not going away. It was really hard. And so I asked my mom, I'm like, what do you think? Because my mom had similar issues. Sorry, Mom, telling people your business, but she'd had some cyst over the years that she'd had removed, and my grandmother also. So my mom's like, well, that's kind of strange. You're a little young to be going through this. When I was like, she didn't start having those issues until she was in her 30s. So she's like, well, maybe you should just go get it seen. So I followed her advice and I went to see a nurse practitioner, and she did an exam, but she didn't feel anything. And she was like, well, knowing your family history, just of cysts, I had no immediate history of breast cancer in my family. She's like, let's just get a baseline mammogram just because. And I was like, okay, sounds good. So a couple weeks later, I ended up going to get a mammogram. But when I went, the radiologist was talking to the technician over the phone, and he's like, I am not doing a mammogram on a 26-year-old. Like, that is ridiculous. There's no need. He's like, how about you do an ultrasound first to wherever she says this lump is, and if we see something, we'll do a mammogram. So the technician came and explained that to me, and I was like, fine, whatever. So she does the ultrasound, and then she left the room, and she comes back a little later, and she's like, okay, yeah, we're going to do the mammogram, but the order was only written for one side. And she goes, actually, we're going to image both sides. And I was like, okay. So had the mammogram done, and I was changing my clothes, like getting dressed, and I could hear the technician on the phone. She's like, yeah, I could see it. Yeah, it was there. And I'm like, first of all, that is terrible healthcare practice. Like, don't do that to your patients. Like, make sure they've left or something before you're talking about them in earshot. But anyway, I really wasn't worried. I was just like, yeah, whatever. So a few days later, I get a call from the nurse practitioner, and she's like, your results came back as BRADS4, which is the highest suspicion of malignancy that a mammogram says. She didn't say all that, but I know that now. She's like, it came back as a BRADS4. Can I suggest that you go see the surgeon and just follow up with it? And I was like, sure, of course. So I ended up going to see a surgeon, and they had lost my films. So I had to do all this testing again. And when I was at the surgeon's office, it was a teaching hospital, so they sent in a bunch of residents to check me out first, which, as a 26-year-old woman, it's not comfortable when all these male residents come in to do a breast exam, but that's what happened. Being in the health profession, I wasn't too put off by it. Like, I knew protocol. I had been around, I had taken care of other people in like their worst moments. So I was like, whatever. But I remember the resident, he was like feeling under my arm and he's like, does this hurt? And I'm like, no. Should it? He's like, no. So they do the whole exam and he walked out and I'm like feeling under my arm and I felt another lump and I was like, ugh, like there's another one. So anyway, go get the mammograms. I get an ultrasound also. And then, so this was a Monday. And when I had the mammogram and everything, they said, they took me into the office afterwards and they said, can you come back for a biopsy? And me, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh yeah, like next week, 2 weeks, whatever. And they said, can you come back tomorrow? And I was like, tomorrow? So yeah, in my mind, then I started thinking, okay, maybe this is serious. So I ended up going back the next Wednesday, or that Wednesday. That was a Monday. I went back Wednesday. Had the biopsy. I had 8 biopsies taken, which was like the worst experience of my life. They let a resident do it, and she did not numb me well. It was searing, white-hot pain. Like what I would imagine getting shot feels like, but of course I've never been shot, so I can't say that for sure. But it like put me in shock and I was like shaking uncontrollably. So after she did that 2 times, the radiologist took over and did the rest, thankfully, and I didn't feel those. And afterwards, the nurse, she's like, can I give you a hug? And I'm like, sure. So anyway, she's like, please call me if there's anything I can do for you. And there were all these signs, of course, but in my mind, I like didn't want to believe it. I was like, there's no way. I'm 26, I'm healthy. This can't be happening. So then they told me that I would have to come back for the results, which I got a call Friday that same week. The surgeon called me and she's like, are you home alone? And I'm like, just tell me, because just tell me. And she said, it is cancer. And I'm a health professional. In my mind, I'm like grabbing a notebook and a pen and I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? And she's like, I'm not going to discuss this with you over the phone. She's like, come back on Monday and we'll set you up with an oncologist. And we'll explain everything then. And that was my experience of being diagnosed with breast cancer at 26 years old.